So welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show, and we are pleased to have with us David Kingsbury. Thanks for coming on, David.
Thank you for having me, Zane.
So David grew up in a broken home. He struggled with addiction, hit rock bottom before turning his life around, earned dual clinical licenses, and eventually running behavioral health programs across Kentucky. And now he's the CEO of Kinged, Kinged LLC, where he uses something called Accelerated Neuroconversion to help high-performing executives break what he calls the empty success cycle. And we're going to dig into that. So you said that you used to think you were pretty hot stuff, racking up awards, leading statewide clinical operations, and then you hit a wall and stepped away from it all. What happened in that? And give me a little bit of more insight in that.
Well, it was just a really interesting time. If we go all the way back, as you stated, like I went through some things in childhood that led to me trying to cope in really unhealthy ways. And, the whole rock bottom experience and all of that was when I became a Christian, that it changed my life. And I wanted to help other people that had been through. So I was diagnosed with PTSD because of some trauma that I'd been through. I turned to substances to help to cope. And I wanted to help other people that had been through similar things, which is why I started my career in clinical counseling. And I started actually in a rehab, which was a really great experience because you get to work with a little bit of everything. So there's mental health, there's addiction, there's family issues, and kind of moved up through the ranks in the field and into supervisory roles, management positions, and then became executive director at a treatment center. And it did really well I was there for about 5 years, and we started with a couple residential units and expanded throughout the state, adding multiple levels of care, outpatients, intensive outpatients. And it was a really great experience, but it got to the point that I had gotten away from what I got into the field for, which was to help people. So I was busy wearing a fireman's hat and dealing with executive administrative stuff, and I wasn't able to see clients. And for me, there's a couple things happen. I mean, you can call it burnout, but I was still very functional. I just didn't have the joy behind what I was doing and didn't feel like I was really fulfilling my meaning or my purpose. And so I stepped away from that and joined a private practice to get back to working with clients one-on-one. And at that same time, I had been, so in my role, we were developing treatment centers for mental health, for addiction treatment. And
So before we get into all that, I want to step back and just give the audience a little bit more background about you so they can put everything in context. So I'm going to ask you some personal questions. So
Okay.
You were 1 year old when your parents divorced. You were constantly relocating, wearing hand-me-downs, living in low-income housing. What's the earliest moment you remember thinking, I need to get out of this?
Well, I mean, there was never really an option to get out of this. Throughout that time, my parents were going through a protracted custody battle, which lasted until I don't know, I was around 12 or 13 years old. And so I was constantly in and out of courts, and there's a whole big story behind that. But um, I guess the big moment of change was when I went to live. So I'd lived with my mother for most of my life, and then I went to live with my father. I was about 14, 15 years old, something like that. And it was at that point that rather than dealing with some of the things that I'd gone through, I was looking for quick fixes. And so very quickly I fell into the wrong crowds, began using substances, going to parties. This is in the 90s. So, raves were big and house parties. And, we had this before I even went to college, but we knew people in college, so frat parties and things like that. But it led down a very dark and lonely road, and it got me into some trouble. And I don't know. I just reached a point where I was like, this is not what I want out of life. And I think that even in a professional sense, so many professionals are doing the things that they feel like will bring them the results that they need. But there is a lack of fulfillment. There's still, I don't know if you would call it emptiness. I call it the empty success cycle. because it's like doing all of these outward things that we think will bring us success. And maybe it looks good on paper. So like you have the money, you have you're leading the team, you have the business off the ground. But there's always another mountain to climb. And once I get there, then I'll be happy. Once I reach this goal, then I'll have a sense of fulfillment. And it never comes. And so what executives tend to do and founders tend to do is look for the next tactic, the next strategy. Here's the next thing that I'm going to implement, or the next skill that I'm going to learn. But external strategies never deal with internal problems. And so much of what we do, and we can get into this, is psychological in terms of the deep subconscious programs that we're running that often are invisible. We're not even aware of them. And I've picked up quite a few of those from my childhood, but it was the process of beginning to rewrite and to change those that brought me into a place where I had success, but also could enjoy that success, could also feel a sense of fulfillment. So to answer your question, the first time I noticed I needed to get out of that, well, it's been a lifetime of trying to get out of it and not finding a solution until the change in my life and coming to Christ, and then beginning to learn the steps about how does the brain work, how does psychological principles apply to this situation, and how can I leverage those to bring about change. And then, of course, as an entrepreneur, you're navigating all of that, and you're failing fast and making mistakes, but it's not always the outward metrics that matter, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So you've been open about struggling with addiction yourself. How did that experience change the way you treat clients compared to a therapist who only learned from textbooks?
That's a good question. So I've had clients that, so for example, in addiction treatment settings, they'll say things like, well, if such and such clinician hasn't been an addict, well, then they don't understand me. They can't help me. And, I tend to say them because usually these are team members of mine and they're very competent clinicians. And I'll say something to the effect of, well, okay, if you had a heart attack and you had to have open heart surgery and you go to the open heart surgeon, would you say to him, have you had a heart attack and had open heart surgery? Because if not, I'm not going to let you do this. That doesn't matter. What matters is, are they skilled? Do they know how to handle the problem? But the other side of that is also true, because if you've been through something, then you have a greater level of empathy and understanding for the struggle and what's going on. So I think that it benefited me in that regard. I can relate to the difficulties of that, but in a sense, we're all addicted to something. It may not be a chemical, a substance. Pornography is huge. I'm seeing a lot of that nowadays. Pornography addiction, also addictions to, the obvious ones of gambling and things like that. But many executives are addicted to power. They're addicted to influence. They're addicted to the numbers, the bank account numbers, or the conversion numbers, or what have you. And that seems more noble than chasing a drug on the street, but it's still a loss of control. You're not operating from a place of wholeness and fulfillment. You're operating from a place of scarcity and lack, and you're trying to find it in something else. So I think that my experiences helped me to understand that at multiple levels. And the solution is not like knuckling and saying, well, I'm just not going to do this, or I'm just going to do something different. The solution is changing the operating system that's causing you to make those decisions so that you outgrow problems and change becomes natural. You become a new version of yourself.
And so you coach executives who've achieved everything on paper, but you say they're feeling hollow inside. What's the first time when someone is stuck in what you call the empty success cycle? What are the signs that you see that are common?
Well, it can look different for different people. Like, so for some, it's your classic burnout, where they feel. There's a point in my career where I reached, as an executive, just being crispy. I didn't have enough energy to keep everything going. And I would never have admitted this. We're all Superman to everybody else, but on the inside, I was trying to pour from an empty cup. And that exhaustion is not always physical. It definitely can be physical, but it's like a mental and emotional exhaustion where you just feel dry. That's one piece of it. It can also be the shiny object syndrome, where people are just constantly chasing the next thing and like, this is what's going to fix the problem. This is what's going to fix the problem. And they're on this never-ending external technique quest that always ends in fulfillment, or at least not the results that they hoped that they would receive. And that's the way that it can show up. It can show up in lack of contentment. Like, there are many executives who look around at their life and they're like, I'm living a life that people would dream of, that people would love to have, and I'm not happy. I feel like I'm missing something, and they don't have that sense of fulfillment. And so money does not equal wealth. Like, wealth is a much deeper concept, and helping executives get to that point to where they're operating from a place not of compulsion or all of the scripts that we carry from our past. They're operating from a place of internal alignment and fulfillment and vision, and that's where the decisions flow from. That brings about a success that has the external metrics, but also the internal sense of wholeness, which I think everybody's really looking for. And there's a path to that, but it's counterintuitive. You don't deal with the internal stuff by dealing with the external.
So let me ask you, just so that I can understand. So I'm going to ask my questions, and hopefully usually the audience is thinking the same thing, and I'm thinking, if they're not, then it's just for me. But I'm thinking, so can you give me an example without obviously disclosing who your clients or patients or however you describe them? Can you give me an example of somebody who's navigated through this with you and had some success, so that I kind of understand the process that you use in a real world kind of way?
Mhm. Well, there's a lot. So I worked with a medical director. She had excellent clinical outcomes, but unusually high staff turnover, right? So operationally, everything seemed fine, but she was making decisions from a constant state of stress, right? And her team felt it. There's a psychological principle called emotional contagion. We can catch emotions like you can catch a cold, and that happens with leaders and their teams. And so once we focused on emotional regulation and identity alignment, right, the culture of her company shifted quickly, right? So like within months, retention improved, patient referrals increased, and she'd always liked her job and she'd always been very good at it. But it was new for her to crush her goals and actually enjoy it, and for more than a moment before the stress returned. So you know that's an example in terms of how it's bigger than just the person, right? Your team doesn't just follow your strategy; they follow your emotional frequency, and so
So
that's a big.
what were the strategies that you used in that particular instance? What did she employ that brought about the change? How did you coach her into making whatever changes that she made to achieve success? I mean, real success, as opposed to just the transparent kind of success.
Mhm. So for that, we're getting into the abundance approach, or what the program that I use. Let me back up a little bit. So to build out this pathway, it's kind of been an evolution. So it started with, I was clinically trained, so learning clinical techniques, psychoanalysis, cognitive behavioral therapy, existential therapy, solution focus, family systems, all of that, right? So that's the psychological foundation. And, alongside that, and I really have leaned into this, is, a study of neurology, studying brain scans, studying brain structures, how things function. So I have a better understanding of what's going on, behind the curtain, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
because those things are critical. Um, like, for example, we have a system in our brain called the reticular activating system, right? It's our filter. And you've probably heard examples of how, like, someone buys a car and then they notice that car everywhere. It's not like everybody went out and bought that car. Now our brain is filtering for that. So there are things that it actively notices, and there are things that it actively filters out. And often that's beyond our conscious awareness. That's a subconscious process.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking for problems and issues to deal with and obstacles to conquer. That's what your brain filters for. That's what you see. But it also filters things out. So you might not see opportunities. You might not see breakthroughs. You might not see the potential within a staff member. You only see where they mess up. And shifting that requires an entire subconscious technique process, right? Now, from the psychological techniques that I learned, I developed a system called Accelerated Neuroconversion, ANC. So you mentioned that earlier. ANC, basically, what I did with that is just took the best techniques from psychology, but also from the military, from the business world, from education, principles that are used, and that if you follow a certain path, they're very effective at training a new employee, training a dog, training a child, training a soldier. And a lot of this is behavior modification. And what we're doing with accelerated neuroconversion is harnessing neurological automation. And by that, I mean, like, think about, the first time that you learned to do something complex, right? Or the first time that you ever did a podcast. There was a lot of things to that, a lot of things that you had to focus on, or like driving, there's all these different things that I have to remember. But after a while, you pick it up, your brain automates it.
Yeah.
So we have all of these collections, these programs, these mental automations, and some of them are good and some of them are bad because the brain doesn't discriminate. It says, if you do something enough times, I'll automate it. And so sometimes we have things in our life that are very good, and sometimes we have things that are very harmful. But once they're automated, we're just on autopilot. We don't even realize that we're doing it. So ANC helps people to create mental automation that is positive and that is intentional. So it automatically creates the things that they want to do, which reduces the effort involved in doing those things. And that led
So
into
how do you do that? So I understand the idea behind doing that, because I think of when you get acclimated to something, you can tune something out or tune something in without ever thinking about it. It's like people who live next to the L train in Chicago. Somebody would walk into their apartment and just be jarred, and they don't even notice it because they've just become acclimated. Their brain has. So I understand that, but how do you do that so that you do it from a positive standpoint? That's what you're talking about, right? Did I accurately describe that? So that you're actively doing something positive instead of, or so that your brain can automatically put the positive spin on things as opposed to automatically putting the negative spin on things. What's the pragmatic or the practical way that you do that?
Well, there are several different roads that lead to Rome. Some of the most, if you want to talk about practical or quick, is repetition. So doing something repeatedly. That actually affects the subconscious. Like, when we're very young and we're getting into a little bit of abundance approach territory, but when we're very young, we are, around the first 6, 7, 8 years of life. EEGs tell us that we're in a theta brainwave state, right? And so theta is the hypnosis state, right? You're in theta when you're being hypnotized. You're in theta when you're in deep meditation. And you're in theta when you're falling asleep or when you're waking up, right? Well, theta is like a doorway into the subconscious. It's when that programming occurs. Now, young children are in theta because they're having to learn everything. That's why they're sponges. And so they're just learning by what they're around, how to navigate society, how to deal with family rules, how to practice hygiene, how to learn in school. And when they become adults, then those programs operate, and it's really automatic. That's why it can be difficult to change it, because about 95% of everything that anyone does is subconscious. We only make conscious decisions. It's a bit of an illusion because it feels like we're making decisions, but we're actually not. Think about your routine. Most of what you are doing today is what you did yesterday, which is what you did the day before, and what you'll probably do tomorrow. And changing that repetition is one way to bypass that. But there are also techniques that get you into a theta brainwave state so that you can actively shape or reframe what that program looks like. Now, with accelerated neuroconversion, there's what I call a neural target. And so a neural target is not, so in our brain, we have neurons, and those neurons are connected by dendrites, and then Hebbian law, right? Neurons that fire together, wire together. So things that we do more frequently tend to make stronger connections. Those pathways become stronger. But sometimes people try to change a automated behavior with just a single pathway. But the reality is that nothing exists in isolation. So like an example I use is Someone that says, okay, I go to McDonald's and, I know it's unhealthy and I want to stop eating fast food, right? So they're focusing on kind of a biological pathway. Like, I'm not going to eat this food. But the problem is, it's not just about food. Like, maybe they've had a really hard day and that's their reward, or maybe, in the middle of it, "Hey, this is my break to help me recharge." Okay, so that's a different pathway. That's a pathway concerned with meaning, and maybe they meet their friends there, right? And so it's kind of a social thing. Like, they get together, they hang out, they talk. Well, that's a different pathway that has to deal with relationships. And so there's different areas of the brain and different pathways that all meet. With accelerated neural conversion, we change the whole neural target, which is all the associated pathways. Because otherwise, and this is why a lot of times when we try to change a habit, we fail, is because we're trying to change one pathway, but there's multiple others that are fighting against it. So we have to shift them all at the same time. And that's ANC. Now, ANC deals with automation in the sense of, repetition and things that we do in these neural pathways, whereas the abundance approach takes that a step further and deals with identity level questions about meaning, questions about purpose. And there are three pillars to the program: wholeness, fitness, and then impact. And so we can get into the details on that if you want, but that's basically the progression. And that's how this came about. One thing kind of led to another.
You said wholeness, fitness, and what was the last one? Oh, you broke up there. Just wholeness, fitness, and
Impact.
impact. Okay, so I do want to get into that because this, so let's say I'm executive and I'm burned out. So I've been an executive and in really high powered job, and at various times I just got totally burned out, totally angry and upset, and wanted to change things, and I just like powered through it. I guess you probably have heard this story before. So tell me, if I'm coming to you and I have, I've got whatever, I've got 100 employees I got to deal with, and I have all these problems, and but I'm also having a lot of success, but I'm not really that thrilled about things. Even though financially I'm making a lot of money, and people on outward would say, "Oh, you're so successful. I wish I had what you have." But then inwardly, I feel like I'm just not satisfied. In fact, I know somebody who was literally running a $200 million company, and he was making so much money, and he was literally just the most miserable person. I mean, not like a bad person. He was just miserable. How would you help somebody like that? That didn't describe me, because I wasn't what I'd say miserable, but this person in particular, who had what you'd say was everything, and he started to abuse alcohol, and it just could not get happiness. How do you help somebody like that?
Well, again, it's all very personalized. The way the program works is it begins with education, so helping people to understand some of these concepts that are affecting them, that are like, Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain. Let's pull that back and see what's going on, because we need to. If you were going to debug a computer, you need to find where's the corrupted code, and that's the first step. And so education, psychologically, is a way of kind of breaking up the ground. It gives the mind new things to think about, new ways to approach things. And that opens what's called neuroplasticity, right? Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change and to rewire. The brain is not static. Even brain structure can change through neuroplasticity. That's the first step. The second step is to begin exploring, where do these things come from? What are the impacts that they have upon you? And what's the impact that you would rather have? And then it's the process of using, I call them top gear transformation techniques, so shifting identity. And that deals with the subconscious level. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that. When people are living in that state of, if you just say, oh, they're miserable, uh, often one of the things that you're talking about is a concept called cognitive dissonance, right? And so cognitive dissonance is really important for changing subconscious belief and identity change, because the brain hates change. And the reason for that is let me back up a little bit. Our brain does not exist to make us happy. It does not care about whether we're successful. It does not care about if we have deep meaning in our lives. It wants us to survive, period. And so everything the brain does is designed to help you to survive another day. And if the things that you did yesterday were effective, like even if like maybe you were miserable yesterday or you did a bunch of stuff that you hated, the brain said, you stayed alive, so let's do that again. And the reason it does that is because what's familiar feels safe. And part of this, we're talking about nervous system states. And when we challenge that, when we begin to step outside of that comfort zone and do something different, alarms go off in the brain and it says, wait, this is unknown territory. This is potentially dangerous. And so it fights against us. And cognitive dissonance is one of those concepts that comes out of that because of the brain, hating change. And what it causes is for us to resist new thoughts or behaviors that conflict with the established mindset. And then like the RAS and things like that come into play in terms of filtering and keeping you on that path. But let's say that someone believes I am an honest person. Like, I'm not a liar. I tell the truth. I'm an honest person. I value that. I value that integrity. And then a situation comes along where maybe the consequences for being honest are very severe. And so they lie to avoid those consequences. Well, now here comes cognitive dissonance because what you're doing doesn't match your beliefs. So the brain has one of two ways to resolve that. One is it can basically change the perception, right? So I will begin to employ what's called ego defenses, defense mechanisms. So maybe it's denial. Maybe it's I repress that. I don't think about that. But the underlying pressure remains. So the only way to resolve it is either to change the belief, like, okay, well, I guess I am a liar. Okay, well, then we align and there's no friction. Or I have to change the behavior to come back in line with my belief. Like I go to the person that I lied to and I say, hey, look, I wasn't honest. I'm willing to accept these consequences. And then the belief is maintained and the cognitive dissonance goes away. So those are the two strategies. And when you see someone who's miserable, 9 times out of 10, there's something deep in their operating system and their beliefs that don't align with what's going on in their life. And that's why they're not experiencing fulfillment. That's why they've got everything that looks great on paper, but they're miserable on the inside. And so untangling that knot is the key. And they can change their behaviors or they can change their beliefs. And very often it's a little bit of adjustment in both areas that puts them on a different path. So the things that they do are also rewarding and there's not that friction.
So what if you have somebody who is in a career and it's the very thing that they do that they have to that makes them successful, creates that cognitive dissonance? So how do you so in other words, their survival and their success, financial success, is directly intertwined with the thing that makes them miserable. Whatever the exact steps that they go to create their financial success is what's causing the cognitive dissonance. How do you fix that? It almost seems like an impossibility.
Well, I mean, you can always like change careers and things like that, but that's a drastic step to take.
Yeah.
More often than not, like when someone is experiencing that, it's not well, like take burnout as an example. Usually people don't burn out because of overwork. Now it's important that you have good work-life balance and that you have times to rest and times to recharge, but human beings can handle a lot of pressure. We can handle a lot of work. So it's not the overwork that's the issue, or maybe the tasks or whatever in the job that you're describing. It's identity misalignment. So if I'm doing something, but on the inside, I feel like this is um, contradicting my beliefs. Maybe it's honesty. So they're in a career where they're having to um, outwardly there's all these tasks and things that they do, but inwardly maybe there's some decisions that they have to make that are dishonest, right? Or maybe it is sacrificing. Like every parent runs into this. Like I want to Particularly for fathers, I think, fathers are like, well, I want to be a good provider. That's part of being a good father. That means I have to go to work and I have to put food on the table and I have to do all those things. But I also want to be present. I want to, spend time with my kids. I want to, impart um, personal moments with them. But those two things conflict because when I'm at work, well, I can't be spending time with them. When I'm spending time with them, I'm not providing and making money. So sometimes it's adjusting the approach to that or adjusting those beliefs that maybe the underlying identity structure of that is, well, I'm a failure. It doesn't matter what I do. Okay, well, that's going to color everything that you do in your day and how you feel. So finding, again, where that corrupted code exists, very often people can maintain the job that they're working in. And it's kind of like not just a fresh coat of paint on a beat up car. It's about replacing it with a new engine. The car continues to run. It runs more effectively. It's faster, stronger, because the thing that's driving it changed. And that's alignment.
So your flagship program called the Abundance Approach, you've said it can help founders scale to 7 figures in 6 to 12 months. What makes you that confident?
Mm-hmm. Well, executive coaching, if you look at just the stats, just to kind of pull back for a moment, executive coaching is proven, just like clinical counseling, like the research that is very effective is out there. So anyone that does any type of executive coaching tends to see improvements in these areas. But the difference is, are they doing it and working themselves into a situation like you described, where they're even more miserable? All right, so now I've reached the income level and I've lost my family, or I'm disconnected, or I'm miserable on the inside. So the key is to begin to shift everything together. And let's say that in the example I gave a moment ago with the medical director, she was looking for all these different stressful situations. That's what her brain was filtering for. And because that was taking her bandwidth and her attention, she was missing opportunities. Like, you probably know people, you say you've been in a board meeting, and there are those who, as you're talking about a situation, the thing that they focus on is all the challenges, all the problems, all the reasons why this won't work or why this is going to be difficult. And you probably know other people in that same conversation that are going, yeah, but there's this we could do, or here's a potential solution, or here's something we could try. That's a difference in the filtering. And when that perception changes, then possibilities change. And so people tend to, just as a kind of a natural consequence, outgrow the roadblocks. And then they move into greater time management. They move into more effective sales. They move into, making their operation more efficient, and all of that leads to revenue increase. So it's kind of more of a secondary effect. Now, I have done over the years, business coaching and helping entrepreneurs, and particularly in the consulting that I do with my business, is to helping treatment centers to navigate all of the state and federal regulations and the complexity of all of that, and staffing issues, and how to have an effective program that meets the guidelines, that's evidence-based, but that also stays true to their vision for that program. But that I don't do a lot of that with the program. With the program, it's more about dealing with the inward issues, because what happens is people have, once that shifts, they have these aha moments. Like, maybe you've had a time like this where you were facing a difficult problem and you tried this and you tried that, you tried this, and nothing seemed to work. And then maybe when you weren't trying to work on it, you were doing something else or watching a TV show or something clicked and you went, aha. And now you knew the solution. It was almost intuitive. That's how it works.
Mm-hmm. So you went from running clinical operations for statewide agencies to launching your own company. What was the scariest part of that leap?
Well, I did it safely. So I was an entrepreneur for a while. I started building the business while I was working. That was one of the things that I determined early on. Was I'd seen and worked with companies who, founders started their venture highly leveraged, right? And two big mistakes whenever you're starting something from just a business coaching perspective is one is to have very narrow margins, and two is to begin in the hole, because typically you're gonna end up in the hole just starting off, just in terms of operation, until things get going. So what I did is I decided I'm not going to leverage anything. So I'm going to start the business with zero debt. I'm going to do everything on my own, which to be fair, I advise clients against this as well, because if you got the money, don't waste your time doing something that you're not good at. Hire someone that can do it. That's going to accelerate you. You're going to avoid a lot of problems, a lot of trial and error.
Yep.
But if you don't have the money, then it's time to roll up your sleeves, right? You're going to have to be split.
I see this all the time.
Yeah. And so that's a big piece. And the other thing is designing it so that there are very narrow or very wide rather margins, because if what we're seeing now with inflation, there are a lot of companies that were functional, and then inflation increases, or the cost of their product increases, and they have two options: they increase the price, which is what most people are doing, or they take the hit. And some companies are closing the doors. There's a lot that I'm talking to that and just as an executive personally, we project, oh, we're fine. Companies do that, but they're not fine, and so what I did was to stack the cards in my favor and continued working while building the business, and then just kind of transitioned over. Now, working with the private practice as opposed to as an executive was tremendously helpful, because as an executive, you're always on call, you're always on duty. There's always something to address. But with a private practice, you have much more flexibility in terms of your time. So that's how I approached it.
So what's the next big thing for Kinged LLC that you haven't announced yet?
And I've always got like 13, 14 different irons in the fire and things that I'm exploring. Lots of things. So one is thinking about what I really like to do. And speaking of time constraints, this is a challenge. So I'm doing a lot of exploring and testing before I dive into this, but some type of event where, I could go on a podcast like this. My goal is always to help somebody. If someone comes away with something that's beneficial, then it's a win. But an event would be something that showcases some of the best things within the abundance approach. And it could be even just a 2-3 hour, online webinar or something, and give a lot of little things, people can use to, and if they continue on and say, the abundance approach is something that I need, awesome. If not, they'll have a lot of takeaways and things that they can immediately implement that'll bring about change. So that's one thing. We're looking into and working with some marketers on some creative strategies and different ways that we can get the message out there. One of the challenges with the abundance approach is that it's very difficult to market, because it was intentionally built to be holistic, right? So there's 3 pillars to the program. The wholeness pillar is about things like purpose, things like meaning, transcendence, right? The deeper things. That's the foundation. And fitness is about physical fitness. It's about emotional health. It's about, how do we manage our time in a way that is conducive to the goals that we want to accomplish? And then impact, which is the third phase, is how does that play out in our friendships and our relationships with our family, in our career and our work? How do we make an impact, a generational impact, a legacy? And all of it needs to flow from a place of internal alignment and from meaning and purpose. Otherwise, we're just grinding gears. We're just pushing through. And that's why a lot of people feel fatigued and overwhelmed and empty and in the things that they're accomplishing. But how do you market that? Because like if I were to say, okay, I'm a physical fitness trainer, we're going to help you get healthy and lose 30 pounds. That's easy to market, right? Or if I say, we're going to help you, overcome anxiety and depression, right? That's easy to market. Or I'm going to help you spiritually, with existential questions and meaning, purpose. Well, that's easy to market. But the program is all of those. So how do you say, without being like, well, we do everything? But that's not what we're doing. We're doing one specific thing, which is identity change, but it affects everything. And so I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling, but that's one of the things that we're working on, trying to present that in creative ways that resonate.
So, David, if somebody says this is resonating with me, and I want to talk to David, maybe he can help me get past my burnout and maybe become more successful, and not necessarily always financially, but maybe financially, but be more successful as a human being. How do they get in touch with you?
Well, yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like many high-level professionals believe their next breakthrough will come from better tactics or working harder. And there's plenty of of coaches and consultants out there that can help you with that. But more often than not, the real shift happens when they upgrade the internal architecture that drives their decisions in the first place. So if someone listening sees themselves in this conversation, maybe they're successful on paper, but constantly carrying pressure, maybe they're I don't know, pushing themselves to do more because their achievement never seems to translate into fulfillment. Or maybe they know, that something internal isn't aligned with the work they're putting in, like the example you gave earlier, or that's usually a signal worth paying attention to. And most of the people I work with didn't initially think they needed like identity level performance training. They just noticed something about their leadership or their life felt off. And most would say that, they put off doing something about it for far too long. But when they did take action, it was the key, to reaching new heights that weren't just not just more profitable, but more meaningful. And if that resonates, the easiest step is to simply, you can schedule a consultation through my website, or I'm on LinkedIn. So you can contact me on LinkedIn, just shoot me a message, and we can talk through what's going on to see whether the abundance approach might be helpful. The only risk is losing time, but the gain just might be unlocking deeper and more satisfying impact in your future.